I was walking past the Hermès flagship in London the other day, and the atmosphere felt surprisingly heavy, but not for the reasons you'd think. For over a year, the global narrative has been one of pure gloom. China's property market in freefall, Western inflation squeezing the middle class, and the supposed death of a luxury boom. You'd expect these boutiques to be quiet, echoing chambers of a bygone era of excess. But then I looked at the actual data coming out of the latest boardrooms in Paris and London. Axel Dumas, the CEO of Hermès, didn't look like a man managing a crisis. In fact, he sounded almost detached from the public struggle, flatly telling investors that the idea of people suffering from high prices simply wasn't his reality. While the world talks about a recession, his sales in the U.S. were up 12%, and in China, the supposed epicenter of the economic slowdown, they'd surged by 9%. Even Burberry, a brand that was bleeding money and facing its first loss in 16 years, is suddenly seeing its Chinese storefronts crowded again, with sales jumping 6% in a single quarter. Feels like a glitch in the matrix. On one hand, the headlines scream about cost of living crises, yet on the other, the demand for five-figure handbags is hitting record highs. When you look closer, the explanation is even more provocative. It's not just old money keeping the lights on. It's a strange fusion of AI-driven stock market millionaires in the States and a resilient new wave of Z-generation shoppers in China who seem completely unfazed by the macroeconomic noise. Yet beneath this giddy excitement from luxury CEOs, there's a lingering shadow. LVMH's Bernard Arnault is still preaching extreme caution, and analysts are warning that this entire recovery is built on a very fragile foundation, the volatility of the stock market. If the AI bubble flinches, the luxury world might fall with it. It makes you wonder, are we witnessing a genuine economic rebirth, or are we just watching the world's wealthiest spend their winnings before the next big correction? Here, standing in front of that window, looking at a bag that costs more than a mid-sized sedan while reading news notifications about a global recession, I felt like I was being gaslit.
Yeah.
It felt like a massive contradiction. We have these headlines screaming that the sky is falling, specifically regarding the Asian markets and the property crisis there. But then we have the CEO of Hermès essentially shrugging and saying business is booming. It feels like we are looking at two completely different worlds, and I can't quite figure out which one is real.
It certainly feels like a paradox, doesn't it?
Totally.
It's that feeling of cognitive dissonance where the data on the screen just doesn't match the vibe in the streets. If you peel back the layers, these aren't actually contradictory signals. No, they are just signals coming from different parts of a rapidly bifurcating economy.
Bifurcating, so splitting in two.
Exactly. We aren't looking at a return to old luxury consumption, the kind driven by general economic tides, where a rising tide lifts all boats and everyone buys a nice watch.
Right.
Instead, we are seeing the dividends of very specific economic engines that are firing on all cylinders, while the rest of the engine block is, frankly, rusting.
So it's not that the whole economy is great. It's that specific parts are generating enough cash to buy a lot of Birkin bags.
Precisely. And this is where we need to reframe our thinking for this deep dive. We need to stop looking at a handbag as just a fashion accessory or a status symbol for a moment.
Okay.
In the context of what we're discussing today, that handbag is a Geiger counter.
A Geiger counter. That is a bit dramatic.
Maybe, but it fits. It's measuring the radiation, or in this case, the output of three specific high-intensity economic reactions: state capacity in high-end manufacturing, the velocity of capital accumulation in AI, and a massive demographic dividend in the East.
That is a heavy load for a leather bag to carry.
It is, but the data supports it.
Yeah.
Our mission today is to use that price tag, the five-figure consumption, to measure the success of industrial policy, to track where AI wealth is actually going, and to locate the shifting center of gravity in the global economy. Because when Axel Dumas says sales are up 9% in China amidst a property crisis, he isn't talking about the average person. He's talking about the beneficiaries of a new system.
Using the boutique as a barometer for industrial policy.
Yeah.
So let's start with that first engine you mentioned, state capacity. Because when I think of state capacity or industrial policy, I usually think of bridges, dams, maybe steel mills.
Sure.
I don't think of luxury goods.
And that's the mistake most people make. They think industrial policy is about concrete. But in 2026, industrial policy is about value chains.
Yeah, what do you mean by value chains?
I was reading a fascinating profile recently that illustrates this perfectly. It's about a lead engineer named Chen, based in the high-tech corridors of Shenzhen. Now, when we think of Shenzhen, we might still have this 1990s image of sweaty assembly lines and cheap plastic toys. But Chen's reality is completely different.
Right. Shenzhen is basically Silicon Valley hardware edition now.
Exactly. For the past 5 years, Chen has lived and breathed what are called the new three industries. Specifically, he works in semiconductor integration for electric vehicles.
The new three, that's EVs, batteries, and solar.
Correct. These are the sectors the state explicitly targeted for dominance. It wasn't an accident. So by late 2025, as the state-led push for self-reliance and high-end manufacturing reached its zenith, Chen's company secured a massive global contract that sent their internal valuations soaring.
So the company wins big because of the policy.
To celebrate, Chen didn't just buy a new car or put money in a savings account. He walked into an Hermès boutique and purchased a bespoke leather trunk.
A trunk?
Yeah.
Like an old-school steamer trunk.
A bespoke one, likely costing tens of thousands of dollars. Now, imagine a man who spent his youth in a rural village, perhaps watching his parents work in low-end manufacturing, now browsing the finest craftsmanship in the world. It's a generational leap. And from what the profile suggested, he wasn't doing it out of a desire for bling in the Western rapper sense. He saw it as a tangible marker of his participation in a national victory.
That's interesting. So for Chen, that luxury item is a dividend of the state's industrial foresight.
As a commentator who tracks these shifts, I find Chen's story striking because it bridges the gap between cold industrial policy and hot lived reality. While some might see this as mere consumerism, I see it as the state capacity model in action.
Right.
The luxury market's recovery in China isn't just about fashion. It is the physical manifestation of a manufacturing superpower rewarding its architects.
It's a reminder that when a system successfully moves an entire industry up the value chain, the wealth created doesn't just sit in a bank, it flows into the streets and the boutiques. But I want to dig deeper into how this happens, because it's easy to say industrial policy created wealth. How does a government policy written in Beijing end up putting cash in Chen's pocket in Shenzhen?
To understand why Chen can afford that trunk, we have to look at a boring-sounding metric that actually runs the world. It's called DVA, or domestic value added.
Okay, DA. I've seen this in the Stanford reports. How does a percentage point on a chart turn into a luxury trunk in a hallway?
Well, think of it like an iPhone. 10 years ago, if a factory in Shenzhen shipped an iPhone to the US, the export value might have been, say, $600. But China only kept maybe $15 of that.
Because they were just screwing in the screws. They were just the final step in a long chain.
Exactly. The screen came from Korea, the chip from Taiwan, the design from California. China was just the final assembly table. They got paid for the labor, which is cheap, but they don't own the tech. That's low DVA.
So the real money, the profit margin, went back to the people who made the screen and the chip.
Precisely. But the state capacity model changed the game. The data shows that between 2007 and 2020, China's DVA rose by roughly 10 percentage points.
10 percentage points.
It sounds right, you hear 10% and you shrug, but in the global economy, that is an earthquake.
Why is 10% an earthquake?
Because it means they aren't just assembling the phone anymore. Now they're making the screen, they're etching the glass, they're formulating the battery chemicals, they're capturing the high-margin parts of the supply chain.
So Chen isn't just a guy tightening a bolt.
No. Chen is the guy designing the machine that tightens the bolt. And that is a significantly more expensive job. When the Stanford researchers looked at the input-output tables, they found these gains were concentrated exactly where the government pointed its finger. The new three industries: EVs, batteries, solar.
So this wasn't an accident. This was the government saying, we are tired of getting the assembly scraps. We want the engineer's salary.
It's the difference between made in China and made by China. And when you make that shift, you create a middle class that doesn't just buy groceries, they buy heritage luxury goods.
But wait, if they're automating everything, because I know China's deploying robots faster than anyone, doesn't that kill jobs? If Chen designs a robot, doesn't that replace 10 workers? How does that create broad wealth?
That is the classic fear, right? Concern. But the data tells a different story. We have numbers showing that China's robot adoption rate is approximately 12 times higher than the United States when you control for wages.
12 times higher. Huge.
But this aggressive automation boosts productivity. And in economic terms, high productivity is the only sustainable way to generate high wages for skilled workers like Chen. It addresses what economists call the Baumol challenge.
Okay, you can't just drop Baumol challenge and keep walking. That.
The Baumol challenge, or Baumel's cost disease, essentially says it's hard to increase productivity in service sectors. A string quartet takes the same amount of time to play a song today as it did in 1800. You can't make them play faster to save money.
Right, if you make them play faster, it just sounds terrible.
Exactly. But you can make manufacturing faster. By hypercharging the manufacturing sector with robots, China creates a surplus of wealth that can then support high wages in other sectors, and importantly, high wages for the engineers running the robots.
So the robots do the grunt work, and Chen gets paid to be the conductor.
Correct. So when Chen walks into that boutique, he represents a class of workers who are beneficiaries of a state that invested heavily in R&D. The government R&D expenditure climbed from 1.7% of GDP in 2010 to 2.2% in 2017, nearly catching up to the U.S.
Wow.
That investment had to go somewhere. It went into creating companies and jobs like Chen's.
So the Hermès trunk isn't a sign of decadence, it's a sign that the industrial policy worked.
It validates the state capacity model. The state identified strategic sectors, poured in subsidies and R&D funding, and facilitated the rise of companies that could dominate global markets. The payout is now flowing into the pockets of the engineers running these systems.
Dividend.
Chen's purchase is a dividend of that foresight. It's made by China, generating the wealth to buy made in France.
That is a fascinating reframe. It's not just new money, it's policy money. It makes the purchase feel less like a splurge and more like a receipt.
A receipt for national progress, in a way.
But Chen is just one part of this picture. He represents the steady, structured industrial growth. There's another type of wealth accumulating right now that feels even faster and perhaps a bit more volatile.
You're talking about the AI boom.
I was reading this thread from an AI researcher named Julian. Now, Julian is a VC venture capitalist who recently relocated his firm from London to a tech hub in East Asia, and his observations were jarring.
So?
Well, he talked about the velocity of wealth. He said that in London and the West, money felt sluggish. It was trapped in aging institutions, slowed down by regulation. But at the tech hubs of the East, specifically Shanghai, he said the AI-driven capital accumulation is happening at a scale and speed that feels almost futuristic.
The wild East of tech.
Exactly. He described walking through a shopping district in Shanghai where the queues for LVMH weren't filled with old money ladies or tourists. They were filled with 20-something AI developers and founders who had just liquidated early-stage stock options.
That's a very specific demographic.
The contrast he drew was stark. While Western markets struggle with the inflationary drag of the old economy, this new Asian wealth is concentrated, agile, and aggressively optimistic. Watching Julian's observations, I'm struck by the geopolitical weight of a handbag or a watch. We often talk about AI in terms of compute or algorithms, but the real metric of institutional efficacy is where that AI wealth chooses to spend itself.
Julian's observation about the velocity of wealth is critical, and honestly, it's a bit scary if you're sitting in London or New York. It connects directly to a concept emerging in economic research regarding transformative AI, or TAI.
Okay, I'm with you on the manufacturing side. You make better stuff, you get paid more, simple. Yeah. But this AI stuff with Julian, that feels different. You mentioned transformative AI. Is that just a fancy term for AGI? Or is it something else?
It's similar, but specifically focused on the economic impact. The idea is that we are anticipating a technology that won't just increase productivity like Chen's robots, but could automate vast swaths of cognitive labor.
Right, white-collar jobs.
Exactly. Now, usually we think of automation as a slow process, but the expectation of TAI creates what researchers call a strategic wedge.
A wedge? Between what?
Between the productive return on capital and the interest rate.
Okay, you lost me. Productive return on capital and interest rate. Translate that into Julian standing in line for a bag.
Laughs us. Okay, think of it like a game of musical chairs, but the chairs are made of solid gold. If you believe, truly believe, that in 5 years, AI will be able to do 50% of all human labor, what is the most valuable thing you can own right now?
The AI.
The AI, or the servers it runs on, or the energy that powers it. You need to own the capital, because labor, the thing most of us sell to make money, is about to become much less valuable.
It's a land grab, or a compute grab.
It creates a prisoner's dilemma in savings. Everyone, individuals, firms, and nations, start scrambling to accumulate capital now so they can buy a ticket to that future. They are hoarding cash to invest in the machines before the machines take over.
So the queues Julian sees in Shanghai, that's the visual representation of this scramble.
It's the visual representation of the winners of that scramble. The reason Julian is seeing this in an Asian tech hub and not London is because the Asian ecosystems are positioning themselves as the deployment hubs for this technology.
How are they doing that?
Well, we have data from Asian investors showing that global capital is pivoting this way. Canada's largest pension fund, CPP Investments, and even Israel's sovereign wealth fund are deepening their footprints in Asia specifically to capture this AI growth.
Wait, so Western pension funds, the money meant to pay for teachers and firefighters in Canada, are betting on Asian AI?
Yes, they are following the growth. The sources highlight that emerging market tech companies in Asia are leveraging integrated supply chains and cost advantages to outperform. And this brings us back to the new national system mentioned in the Brookings analysis.
This new national system.
It's the terminology used by leadership in Beijing. It implies a more centralized control over capital allocation to mobilize national resources for technological innovation. A lot less. Unlike the West, where capital might be trapped in legacy institutions or slowed down by regulatory gridlock, this system is designed to funnel resources rapidly into new, quality, productive forces. AI structure.
So we have Western institutions struggling with inflation and what Julian called sluggishness, while Eastern hubs are running a high-risk, high-reward sprint toward AI dominance.
Yes, and the luxury consumption is just the exhaust fume of that engine.
It's luxury consumption as the exhaust fume of the AI engine.
It signals a shift in institutional efficacy. Who is better at converting code into capital? If the queues are in Shanghai, it suggests that the mechanism for turning AI innovation into disposable wealth is currently spinning faster there.
If not just about who has the best algorithm anymore.
No, it's about who can deploy it the fastest. Julian isn't just seeing rich kids. He's seeing the result of a system that has removed the brakes on AI deployment.
But isn't there a downside to this strategic wedge? If everyone is rushing to own the machines, what happens to the cost of money?
That's the wedge. This anticipation drives up interest rates because money becomes incredibly expensive as everyone tries to get their hands on it to invest.
Which means it gets harder for normal people to borrow for a house or a car.
It concentrates wealth. That's why you see the giddy excitement of the CEOs matched with the gloom of the general populace in many parts of the world. But in these specific hubs, the wealth generation is real and it is rapid.
It really creates a picture of a two-speed world, doesn't it? We have the AI sprinters and then everyone else. But it's not just the high-flying tech millionaires or the lead engineers like Chen. There's a broader demographic story here that I think is equally important.
The Gen Z story.
Exactly. I recently came across a vlog by a 24-year-old UI designer in Chengdu named Zhao Li. Now, Chengdu is interesting because it's known for being a bit more laid back than Shenzhen or Shanghai, right?
It's known for pandas and tea houses, but it's also becoming a massive consumption hub.
Right, so Zhao Li grew up in a modest household where luxury was a foreign concept. Her parents were probably focused on saving every penny. But last month, she bought her first Burberry trench coat to celebrate a promotion.
A classic entry-level luxury purchase stone.
But in the video, she isn't just showing off the coat. She's talking about her career trajectory. She describes it as a steady, upward climb supported by a stable collective economic environment. And then she does something really interesting. She compares herself to her cousin.
The cousin is in the West.
In Paris. The cousin has a similar education, maybe even a better degree on paper. But the cousin is struggling with stagnant wages, high rent, and the rising cost of basic living. For the cousin, a Burberry coat is an impossible dream.
That is a heartbreaking comparison if you are the cousin.
For Zhao Li, the coat is a quantifiable metric of her mobility, a proof that the system she lives in still offers a ladder to the top. Looking at Zhao Li's pride, I can't help but reflect on the narrative of decadence we often hear about the West. While we might worry about the pressure of the 996 work culture in China, working 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. 6 days a week, there is an undeniable psychological boost that comes from seeing your purchasing power grow every year.
You've hit on something crucial here. We often look at the 996 culture and say, that's exploitative, and in many ways, it is. But if you work 996 and at the end of the year you can buy the coat, you feel like the system works.
Right.
If you work a 40-hour week in Paris but can't afford rent, you feel like the system is broken.
Exactly. It's about the payoff. I understand that this kind of intense consumption-based validation can feel materialistic, and we should be careful not to equate human worth with brand name.
Of course.
However, from a purely analytical standpoint, the fact that China's Gen Z can drive a global luxury recovery while their Western peers are quiet quitting or struggling with rent, is a powerful testament to which system is currently delivering on the promise of upward mobility.
Xiao Li's story is crucial because it moves us away from the outliers, the tech millionaires, and looks at the broader middle class. And the numbers here are staggering. According to InvestCorp data, there are 250 million Gen Zers in China.
250 million. That is nearly the entire population of the United States.
Exactly. Imagine the entire U.S. population, but they are all between 15 and 29. And unlike their Western counterparts, who have grown up amidst the 2008 financial crisis and now a cost of living crisis, this generation in China has largely experienced 3 decades of uninterrupted economic expansion. They are the key growth engine.
But why the luxury goods? Why is that the specific outlet for this mobility? Why not travel or experiences?
Well, they do those things too, but the goods are different. It comes down to the psychology of consumption in an emerging economy. There's a study from the Lilac Journal that differentiates between flaunting value and conspicuous consumption.
They both sound like showing off.
There is a subtle difference. In the West, we often look at showing off wealth as gauche or decadent. We associate it with waste. We value quiet luxury. But for Xiao Li and millions like her, it's about self-realization and social value. It's flaunting value.
So it's a badge of honor?
Yes. It signals, I have arrived. It validates their success through recognized global brands. And importantly, they are digital natives with immense national pride, what's often called China chic or guoqiao.
Right, guoqiao. That's the trend where they prefer domestic brands or foreign brands that pay homage to Chinese culture.
Exactly. They aren't just buying Western brands blindly. They are validating their own success through these brands, often demanding that these brands adapt to their tastes. If Burberry wants to sell to Xiao Li, Burberry has to understand Xiao Li.
And the system encourages this. I thought the government was cracking down on excessive wealth. We heard about common prosperity. Doesn't buying a Burberry coat fly in the face of that?
This connects to the double circulation strategy mentioned in the sources.
Double circulation. I keep hearing this term. What is the simple version?
The simple version is, we can't rely on selling cheap stuff to America anymore. We need to sell stuff to our own people. The government explicitly needs Xiao Li to buy that coat.
Really? The government needs her to shop?
Absolutely. The strategy relies on domestic demand becoming the main driver of development.
So her shopping spree is actually a patriotic duty.
In a macroeconomic sense, yes. Her consumption is a feature of the system, not a bug. The government aims to expand the middle income group to over 560 million consumers. They need these people to spend.
560 million middle-class consumers. The scale is just hard to wrap your head around. It's like 2 Europes.
And this brings us back to the contrast Xiao Li made with her cousin in Paris. In economic terms, this is about the Lewis turning point.
Okay, Lewis turning point. Go.
The Lewis turning point is the moment a developing country runs out of cheap rural labor. You can't just pull people off the farm anymore to work in factories for pennies. Wages start to rise.
And China passed this point years ago.
Yes. The End of Cheap Labor source discusses how China pushed past this era. By upgrading industries like the high-tech sectors Chen works in, they are specifically designing the economy to create high-skilled, high-wage jobs like UI designed to cope with higher wages.
Meanwhile, the cousin in Paris is dealing with what?
Stagnation. The West is grappling with the precariat gig economy jobs, flat wages, and inflation eating away purchasing power. This leads to phenomena like quiet quitting, which is essentially a withdrawal of effort because the economic rewards don't seem worth it.
If you don't pay me enough to buy a house, I'm not going to work hard.
Xiao Li represents the opposite. Intense participation because the latter is still functioning. She puts in the work, she gets the promotion, she buys the coat. The feedback loop is intact.
That is a really stark comparison. Quiet quitting versus loud shopping. One signals resignation, the other signals confidence. But, and there's always a but in these deep dives. We've painted a very rosy picture. Chen is rich, Julian is rich, Xiao Li is happy, Axel Dumas is happy. But if everything is going so well, why does Bernard Arnault, the CEO of LVMH, a man who knows more about global money than almost anyone, sound like he's preparing for a funeral?
He's not quite buying a coffin, but he is certainly preaching extreme caution.
He's nervous. That doesn't fit with the business's booming narrative we just spent 30 minutes building. If Chen and Julian are buying everything in sight, why is the richest man in luxury sweating?
Because Arnault is looking at the macro noise that Axel Dumas might be ignoring. We have to acknowledge the gloom mentioned in your intro. We've been talking about the winners. But if you turn the camera 180 degrees, the background of this picture is actually quite grim.
You're talking about the property market.
I'm talking about the fact that for the average person, not the AI engineer, but the guy who poured the concrete for the engineer's apartment, wealth has evaporated. Property prices in China have been in a slide for 30 months.
And in a market where 70% of household wealth is tied up in real estate, that's like the U.S. stock market crashing and staying down for 3 years.
It's a massive destroyer of household wealth for the older generations and the lower middle class. But if your apartment is worth 30% less, you aren't buying a trunk. You're barely buying dinner.
So who is right? The Hermès CEO or the property data?
They both are. The economy is bifurcating.
Splitting in two again.
Right. The old economy, cement, steel property, is deflationary and struggling. The new economy, AI, EVs, high-end manufacturing, is booming. Luxury consumption tracks the winners of this divergence, the Chens and Julians, but it masks the struggles of the losers.
So the luxury stats are a bit of a mirage, or at least they only show half the picture.
They show the successful half, but the risk is that the foundation is shaky. There's a term now appearing in official Beijing documents, international economic rivalry. This luxury boom is happening inside a fortress economy designed to withstand external shocks like trade wars or partner implosions.
Partner implosion?
Think about the Belt and Road partners. If they collapse, that's an external shock. But the bigger risk, the one that makes Arnaud nervous, brings us back to Julian and the AI story.
The bubble.
The AI bubble risk. Remember the strategic wedge?
The land grab for the robot.
Yes. All this wealth accumulation, Julian's bonus, the stock market rally, is based on the expectation of transformative AI. It's priced in. Markets are assuming the robots will work and they will be profitable.
But what if they don't? What if the technology hits a wall? What if the productivity gains aren't as fast as the stock market thinks?
Then the paper wealth evaporates. If the stock market volatility hits this wealth-based allocation, the consumption power of the Julians could vanish overnight. And if the new three industries face protectionist walls they can't climb, if Europe bans Chinese EVs, for example, Chen's bonus might disappear too.
So it's fragile.
The recovery is built on high expectations of future tech dominance. If that future is delayed, the present correction could be severe.
It's a high-wire act. They're sprinting across a tightrope to get to the AI future before the old economy drag pulls them down.
That is a perfect visualization. And right now, the luxury sales tell us they are keeping their balance. But the wind is blowing hard.
So let's try to synthesize this, because we've covered a lot of ground. We started with the trunk in Shenzhen, moved to AI millionaires in a queue in Shanghai, and ended with a Burberry coat in Chengdu.
And as we said at the start, these aren't just purchases, they are data points. The trunk tells us about the success of industrial policy and state capacity, the ability to move up the value chain.
It tells us that policy can actually create wealth if you stick to it.
Correct. And the queue. The AI wealth queue tells us about the velocity of Eastern capital accumulation versus Western inertia, driven by that strategic race for automation.
It tells us the money is moving faster in the East.
The coat tells us about the reality of upward mobility for Gen Z and a planned economy that is successfully pivoting to domestic demand. It tells us the latter still works for some.
It really reframes the whole decadence argument for me. We used to look at luxury and see waste. We'd see someone buying a $5,000 bag and think that's irrational. Now, looking at the data from Axel Dumas and the streets of Chengdu, I see a scoreboard.
It is a scoreboard, and it's flashing a score that the West might be uncomfortable reading.
It leaves us with a provocative thought to end on. While the West worries about a recession and debates the cost of living, the machinery of the East has successfully converted silicon and policy into the ultimate signifier of confidence. The ability to buy things we don't need but desperately want.
No.
This is a clear signal that the economic heart of the world has already transplanted itself, and it is beating to the rhythm of a different algorithm.
Fifth.
We'll catch you on the next one.